everyone, welcome to Ex-Fundie Diaries. My name is Elly, my pronouns are they, she, and in this video I'm going to be sharing a story that I have been working up to talking about actually since I started this channel. There have been a few times that I've tried to make this video before, but even just thinking through what I would talk about, I was instantly overwhelmed and I knew that I wasn't ready yet. The story that I'm going to share is how, when I was a teenager, I was groomed by a Christian man in my homeschool community. Before I get started, here is a definition of the term grooming and some further explanation about my story. According to an article that I will link down below, grooming is a set of actions that an adult takes to subtly or overtly assert inappropriate control and power over a vulnerable person like a child. Usually, the end result of grooming is SA. In my case, it never made it that far. I'll never know for sure his true intentions or how far he was planning to take this because the process was interrupted, but his actions matched the first few stages of grooming. My boundaries were crossed, and my emotional and psychological safety was violated. And I'm sharing this story for two main reasons. I just have to get it out. This experience that I had, which took place over the course of about 9 months, had such a ginormous impact on me in a negative way. And I have found with many of the things that I have shared on this channel, telling a story that has been trapped inside for years can be so healing. And I hope, as always, that anyone who may have gone through something similar could feel less alone and could feel understood. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I'm going to try to use as few identifying details as possible, because it is not my goal with this video to expose this man or his family. Mostly for his family's sake. You know, none of them asked for this. I don't even know how much they know about this. I'm going to call him Mr. Jones. It was the most generic last name I could think of that, as far as I can remember, I've never met someone with that last name. So hopefully that's a good pseudonym to give him. So, it started in the fall of 2009. I was 18, and while it is true that legally in the United States, 18 is considered an adult, I don't see it that way. And beyond that, I was an extremely young 18-year-old. My parents purposefully kept me as young as possible while simultaneously giving me as much responsibility as possible in terms of taking care of my younger siblings and things like that. But in terms of being exposed to the world, they purposefully tried to keep me innocent, young, and as naive as possible, because the mindset that they were instilling in me was that as a young girl, someone who is assigned female at birth, I wasn't supposed to be self-sufficient in any way. I wasn't supposed to be growing into an adult who could, take care of myself, who would know any kind of red flags to look for in any scenarios, because I was supposed to be under my father's headship, and then I was supposed to be passed from him to my future husband, and then I would be under my future husband's headship. The other thing that is important to keep in mind is that I was extremely, extremely vulnerable during this time. I was the perfect target for something like this to happen because I was in crisis mode. My dad's domestic violence was in full swing and had been for a year and a half. And My home life was total chaos. There was emotional, physical, spiritual abuse happening at all times. And I was desperate for help, desperate for someone, anyone, to help me and my family. I just wanted the chaos to end. In the fall of 2009, there was this event that a group of people from my homeschool community went to, and I ended up sitting next to Mr. Jones. This man was the father of one of my friends, so at least a good 20 years older than me. I think he was probably more like 30 years older than me. As we were talking, I asked him to share his testimony with me. And for anyone who didn't grow up Christian, this is a very common thing for Christians to ask each other in general. What's your testimony? That's basically like the story of how you came to be a Christian. So it wasn't weird or out of the ordinary that I asked him this. I'm trying to think how much I can share here because I don't want there to be too many identifying details. I'll say this. Something he said in relation to his testimony made me feel comfortable to open up to him about my family situation. And I did not share a lot of details at first at all. I did not say that my dad was abusive. It would have felt like a betrayal to my dad to say that. And it just was like a lot of disclosure for this first conversation. So all I said really was that they were probably going to be getting a divorce, that my parents were probably going to get divorced. And that was really testing my faith. You know, I didn't understand why God would allow these things to be happening. So we had this great talk, or, felt like a great talk at the time. And then the event was over and we all went home. And I didn't really think much of it other than I'm so glad I got to talk to this dad. It was great to get to know him a little bit better. I didn't think that anything else would happen. But 3 days later, I got an email from him. And the email was 6 pages long. It was sent at 12:40 a.m. And he explained that the way that he got my email address was by getting it from his wife, Mrs. Jones' computer. And the email was some follow-up thoughts from our in-person conversation. And you might be wondering, what was he talking about for 6 pages? Well, it was a lot of personal stories about him. And it was a lot of compliments towards me. He complimented my character and my personality and my physical appearance. I did respond to his first email and I thanked him for everything he shared, for his encouragement, and I told him that I looked up to him and really appreciated him praying for my family. And so then about 3 days after that, I got another email from him, 5 pages long, sent at 1:35 a.m. And again, more personal stories, Bible verses, encouragement, and just honestly like his random thoughts and feelings. So after that second email, it took me 6 days to respond. And I told him in my second response, I'm so sorry it took me so long to respond. It has been so chaotic at my house. It's just been awful. I've been an emotional wreck. There's no way that I could have responded until now. And he responded right away, or that same day, but at 1:40 a.m. And he said, he was so relieved to hear from me because he was worried that I didn't like something that he said and that I wasn't going to respond. He said that he was so worried about me, that he was crying for me, and he just started saying increasingly intimate things. I mean, it already started really intensely with the first email that he sent, but it even got more intimate, emotionally intimate, within the first few back and forth emails. And then before I had the chance to respond to that email, 3 days later, he sent a second one. And this one was at 1:13 a.m. So you can see this pattern that was developing, that not only was he emailing me these super long and intimate emails, but they were starting to come two at a time. Like if I didn't respond yet, he would double email me. And every email he sent was after midnight, usually around 1 or 2 a.m. And as this young, naive 18-year-old in crisis mode, I was following his lead. I was going off of what he was doing in our relationship, if you can call it that. I don't even know exactly what to call our connection, I guess. But he kept telling me, I'm here for you, I'm your friend, you can count on me, you can trust me. And so I emailed him back and asked him if I could actually call him, because I wanted to tell him more details about what was going on in my family. I wanted to tell him that my dad was abusing my mom and abusing me and my siblings. I didn't feel safe putting all of this in email. I thought that maybe my dad could somehow see it. And I just felt safer saying all of it out loud to Mr. Jones instead of writing it out and sending it over email. And he replied again pretty immediately, this time at 2:50 a.m. And he was like, it's funny, I was just going to ask you if I could give you my work phone because I just want to be available to you when you need to vent and you need someone to listen when you're going through a hard time. So he was already planning on taking our correspondence to the next level, from email to phone calls. And in retrospect, this worked perfectly for him, for me to suggest it myself. And he said, this is when I take my lunch break, here's my phone number, my work phone number, and there's this private room that I can go to and nobody will hear. So we made a plan and we talked over the phone. And I remember we talked for a long time that first conversation. And I did tell him details about my dad's violence and other aspects of his abuse. And then over email, he asked me if he could call me again because there was something else he wanted to ask me about or tell me about. And so at this point, now we were emailing back and forth and we were talking on the phone while he was at work. And every time he emailed, it was always after midnight. And he would often say that he was checking my emails while he was at work. But then he would respond very late at night after he was home. These conversations were under the guise of him like counseling me about my family situation. But I was sharing more and more about what was going on, and he wasn't doing anything to help. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't ask me if he could tell anyone. He didn't try to get like anyone else involved. He didn't even advise me to do anything. I mean, I was only 18, so there really wasn't anything I could do. He actually discouraged me in true Fundie man fashion. He discouraged me from looking to psychology because it was all, behavioral science was all BS, bullshit. He just kept telling me that he was my friend and he was going to just be there for me and listen whenever I needed to talk. And that he was just going to keep praying for my family. But when I read these emails now, the man was using me as his journal. He was sharing his thoughts, his feelings, his memories, his hopes, his dreams, his insecurities. He was telling this young, naive 18-year-old his insecurities about his appearance, about his life, his relationships, as like this grown man in his 40s or 50s, however old he was. But after about a month and a half of us sending these emails back and forth, talking on the phone, something happened that I think derailed the way that this was intensely escalating. And this is where the journal entry comes in. So I actually wrote this journal entry in January of 2010. So it was a couple of months after the actual incident. And I was just processing it after the fact. And before I start reading the entry, I do also have to give a quick content warning for emotional and psychological abuse from a parent. That's not the purpose of this entry, but it is included. So I just wanted to give that content warning too. One night when mom and dad had a blow up and I wanted to die, I ran outside and refused to come back in until something was done. And basically what I meant by blow up was a screaming match that went on for hours. Mom was hysterical, and she was literally at my feet begging me to come back in because dad was saying he would leave if I didn't. I told her, good, I hope he does, because I really did. Mom said, I will hate you if you don't come back in, which she apologized for later. I ran down the street bawling and called the Joneses' house. My friend answered the phone. I was sobbing and I asked them if their dad was awake. They said they weren't sure, and I asked if I could talk to him if he was awake, but not to wake him up if he wasn't. Which, oh, little Elly. You called their home phone, like, at night. If he was sleeping, he's awake now. I couldn't even think to myself, maybe it's not the best idea to call a house phone at 10:30 at night. Like, you could wake up the entire household. It just didn't even occur to me. I was just so flooded. I felt like I was dying. I felt like I wanted to die, and I didn't know what else to do except call this person that had been supporting me, or I had thought had been supporting me for the last month and a half, and acting as a mentor, a counselor to me. You know, I wasn't allowed to go to therapy, but talking to Mr. Jones was like the closest that I could get. Mr. Jones was awake, and we talked for an hour or so. Then he prayed for me on the phone, and as he did, God told me to go back inside and that it would be okay. He would be with me. I told Mr. Jones that, and then went inside. When I did, an amazing thing happened. I opened my mouth and God spoke through me. I quietly and gently, with no bitterness or anger in my heart, told Mom and Dad that I would not go on a trip with them until we had a family meeting. They wanted to take a trip to the house that they bought in another state because they wanted to move there. So that's the context for that. I wasn't even planning on saying that. It just came to me. And then I started giving details about it, like I wanted there to be other people there as witnesses. We should film it, and each one of our family members would present their case in turn. And just like an added note here, I was really like a mediator between my parents. So this may sound like a lot that I was suggesting, but I really was taking on the role of like trying to fix their relationship and trying to save our family. It all came from the Lord right at that moment. It was amazing. If I had not called Mr. Jones that night, I don't know what I would have done. I would have lost it. He was such a voice of calm. A while later, Mr. Jones strongly suggested that Mom and I talk to Mrs. Jones to get her advice and insight on our situation. We came to her house one night and told her everything. She told us her testimony. She is a strong, spirit-filled, sweet, honest, and courageous woman, and I admire her so much. I'm glad to be getting to know her better too. But I'm sad that I haven't talked to Mr. Jones in a month or more. I miss him terribly. I guess he passed off the job of mentoring me to Mrs. Jones. It's awkward because I look up to him so much as a father figure and even love him. And I think he probably realized that and didn't know what to do with it. I understand. It just sucks. And I know I said that I understood, but I really didn't. Everything that I said there was what my mom was kind of telling me about it, but I didn't really understand. I felt really, really confused on how we had gone from this intense, constant back and forth with the emails and the phone calls to all of the sudden Mr. Jones pushing me in the direction of Mrs. Jones. And I also forgot to mention that on the phone that night when I called his home phone, towards the end of the conversation, he said, I just want to let you know, I think I'm going to have to tell Mrs. Jones about this because she's going to want to know why you're calling me. And I remember feeling kind of embarrassed in that moment and like confused. And my response was like a very quick, oh, of course. Yeah, go for it. Because it didn't even occur to me that he wouldn't have told her already. Like, I had asked him not to tell anyone about my family because I was protecting my parents, especially my dad, and because they had drilled into me you can't tell anyone. I mean, since I was a child. So I had asked for his confidentiality. But like, I never thought he wouldn't tell his wife. You know, the two are one flesh is what I was taught. And so it was just implied, I thought, that she would be filled in on this. If not the details of my family situation, like she would know that he was talking to me and like counseling me, mentoring me, or whatever. But even if that wasn't implied, it wasn't on me to make sure that he was looping in his wife about this secret little exchange that was going on. And I think that keeping it from her was purposeful. And I think that her accidentally finding out by me calling their home phone kind of screwed things over for him. Things changed in my dynamics with Mr. Jones. He would start to withdraw for a while, and I wouldn't hear from him. And I would feel betrayed, confused. I would feel upset at him, but then I would tell myself that that wasn't fair. So I would turn it on myself instead and say, I must have done something wrong. What's wrong with me? It must be my fault. He said he would be my friend, that he'd always be there for me, but now he's not. What did I do? But then, just as I was, thinking and like accepting that it was over, that I wouldn't hear from him again, he would pop back up. Sometimes it would be after we saw each other at an event, and then he wouldn't really talk to me at the event, but then he would send me an email after and say, oh, I saw you and I wanted to talk to you, but I didn't get a chance. Here's like all my thoughts and feelings in this email instead. One time I left an event and Annie was still there, and he asked Annie how I was doing and said that he was disappointed that he didn't get to see me. And then Annie relayed the message to me. And then other times he would just email me literally out of the blue. And it wasn't like it was short emails at this point. They were long emails again. There was even this one time where he sent me this long email and he thought it didn't go through. So he constructed it from memory and sent a second version because I hadn't had a chance to respond yet. This email had chapters. Like literally he wrote chapter 1 and then he wrote some stuff and then he said chapter 2. It was like 6 chapters or something like that, like paragraphs in between each of his headings of like chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then this other time he wrote like this script of like a video, because I think I had told him that I wanted to like make a video for my dad to try to like convince him to be a good husband or something. And so Mr. Jones wrote a script for me of like his ideas of what I could put in the video. Just like really bizarre when I look back on it now. Really bizarre. And I don't remember exactly when this happened, but there were some times where both Annie and I would drive over to the Joneses' house and just show up on their doorstep crying. And we would ask Mrs. Jones, Mr. Jones, both of them, to pray for us. And the very last exchange over email that I have between me and Mr. Jones was in the summer of 2010. So I was 19 by this point. And it's possible that his email, which did come out of the blue, or at least it had been like a couple of months since his last email. It's possible that that came on the heels of me and Annie going over to his house, but I don't know for sure. I don't have it in my journal. I can't really confirm that for the timeline. But his email was like short and kind of weird. It was like, I've been thinking about you and worrying about you all day. Are you all right? And I wrote a super long response and told him in writing this time more details about my dad's physical violence. And I told Mr. Jones like some ideas I had of like what to do and concerns I had about my younger siblings' safety, and he never responded. And that was the end of our relationship, correspondence, whatever. I would see him again and I would talk to him, casually, like when other people were present. But we never discussed what had happened between us. All his declarations about always being there for me and being my friend and me trusting him and counting on him, it was as if that had never happened. And we just pretended like it had never happened. And yeah, at the time it left me really confused, really disappointed. I felt really embarrassed. I felt really exposed, because I had been so vulnerable, and then he just stopped talking to me. And I felt so abandoned. But it wasn't until I was 26 that I saw this experience in a whole new light. I had logged back into my old email because I was looking for something. I don't remember exactly what it was. But when I logged back in, because I hadn't been in this old email for years, these emails from Mr. Jones, back and forth between us, caught my eye. And I was like, damn, that's a lot of emails. And so I clicked on them and I started scrolling through and I was like, what the fuck is this? I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. And I just thought, how could I have missed this? How could I have gone, 7 years thinking that I had this mentor who, without explanation, just stopped mentoring me? When in reality, a lot more was going on than a mentor-mentee relationship. And it really, really affected me. I started having flashbacks and panic attacks and other PTSD type of symptoms. And I really felt so much shame and really, really blamed myself. How could I have not seen this? How could I have participated in this extremely inappropriate relationship? And that's actually what took me into my own personal therapy for the first time. It was 2017 when I logged into this old email and found all of this. And, you would think that maybe I would have gone to therapy already for all the trauma that I experienced with abusive parents and my dad's domestic violence. And I had gone the year before, in 2016, I had gone to a group therapy class, I guess, called Healing Childhood Wounds, but I still had not gone to my own personal therapy yet. But the reaction that I had to finding these emails and having like all of these memories come flooding back to me about this experience with Mr. Jones, that's what got me into therapy. And my therapist said, yeah, he was grooming you. And I ended up doing some EMDR sessions about it. I can put a link down below to anyone who is interested in EMDR. But that was really, really helpful. I think my biggest takeaway from those EMDR sessions about this experience with Mr. Jones is that it wasn't my fault. You know, I felt so unintelligent. Like, I must have just been so weak that he could pick me out as a target to do this. And yeah, I was extra vulnerable for all the reasons that I explained earlier in this video. But that's not my fault. There was a huge, huge power difference between me and this man. And he exploited that. Whether it was conscious and he was purposefully exploiting it, or it was a subconscious thing, he still did it. And the impact that it had on me was really, really, really deep. But I gotta say, sharing it out loud, I've just gotten done sharing it and I already feel so much lighter. Damn, I haven't even edited this video yet. And I already feel relieved to have said all of this out loud. This experience is not something that I've shared with very many people at all. Even though it happened so long ago, there's been a lot of shame around it, and I've felt a lot of secrecy. And after sharing, I feel internal confirmation that this was a helpful thing to do. So thank you so much for watching, if you've made it this far. Lately, I haven't really been able to respond to comments as much as I have in the past, but I just want you to know that I really do appreciate all of the kind and supportive and encouraging comments. I do read them, I appreciate them so much, and even if I'm not able to respond, please just know that they really do mean a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.